Okay, welcome back if you joined us quite a few months ago. In fact, I think it's been about a year on Beyond the Veil. If you're joining us for the first time or stumbled upon this channel, what we talk about here is the veil is that which separates the experience of the physical world with the experience of the spiritual world. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And we're going to try to introduce the concept of how we perceive things, because this is going to be very critical going into the days after the election and the first couple of months of this year. It's going to be critical. I believe we are probably in what's called the last days. In fact, we've been in the last days since Jesus left the earth with the promise of coming back. And on this channel, we don't get into a discussion of pre-trib and all of that kind of stuff, because what we focus on here is being able to see beyond the veil, or as Jesus would have talked about it, being able to see from above. He told Nicodemus, "You don't know who I am. You're asking all of these dumb questions because you don't see from above." We translate that born again, but the word literally means you born from above, where you're in a different place of perception than you are currently, Nicodemus. If you were perceiving things as Jesus perceived them, you would have known who he was. And even the demonic beings and the fallen entities in the world at that time that were left over from, not to get into it, the flood and the Nephilim and all of that, but these entities that were left over who were a part of this experience in this world, even they recognized Jesus because they had originally, they were in that ether, in that place between the spaces of the physical time world. So they were aware of him. They knew who he was. They knew he was Jesus. In fact, they cried out to him and said, "Why have you come to torment us before our time?" See, they knew he was the Son of God. Nicodemus didn't know that. He didn't even know he was the Messiah because, again, he had not been able to see from above or pierce that veil. That would be symbolically torn in half in the temple on Jesus' resurrection. But let's get into what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks, few times, to try to prepare us for what's coming, which is a thinning of the veil. So you're going to be perceiving things that are going to cause you great concern. It's going to cause great concern about the people around you too, and we got to be prepared for that. So we're going to start our discussion with perceptions. Now, it's an interesting thing, the word perception. I looked it up just for some not biblical, but for some definitions of what the word means. The first one means it's the ability through senses to be aware. So what it's saying is look, here you are. You're an entity. If we go to Genesis 2:7, you're a clay form into which, as it says in Genesis 2, God created the man, or the Adam, out of the clay. So he was physical. He was a physical entity, but he did not have any awareness of, through his senses, of who God was or who he was, until what? God breathed his spirit into the man's nostrils, and then he became aware. Some translations say he became a living soul. In the Hebrew understanding, they wouldn't use the word soul. They would have just basically said he was aware. He became conscious. He became aware of something not outside of himself, something in addition to himself. And that awareness started to define who he was. Now, when God breathed into the man and he became aware of something outside of himself, for example, I'll give you an idea of a type of being that's not aware of too much. Let's just take a single cell microcosm, like a virus, say. Okay, virus is a single cell. It's living, but it's not aware of too much. But when God created man, he created man with senses that connected to the physical world around him. Again, the senses. He created these senses in the clay man that made him aware of things when he became a living being that were outside of himself through those senses. You know, he could see things, he could hear things, he could smell things, he could feel things. Okay, feel tactically, not emotionally. Although he had emotions, but the primary thing we're talking about here is the flesh, or the five senses. So the five senses gave him the ability to be aware or perception. Now, another definition of perception in the dictionary, which is critical to understand, it can also be translated the way to regard or interpret something. Okay, now I put senses because in the physical sense, you don't need the spirit any more than a dog needs a spirit to know it's cold or it's hungry or it's dark outside. See, a dog doesn't necessarily have spiritual awareness in that sense, but the dog has physical awareness through its senses, just like a man does. A man has physical senses. He becomes aware. Oh, it's cold. I'm hungry. What's going on over there? I got to figure this out. So that senses becomes a way to perceive or become aware of things outside of yourself. Now, why I made the word way in red is, where else do we hear about the word way in the Bible? We have Jesus tell us, and we often misinterpret this and put articles in front of it, but in the original languages, when Jesus says, I am, we'll translate it the way, the truth, and the life. But what he's actually saying is, I am way. See, I'm something by which you can regard and interpret things around you. He's the way. I am truth, not I am a little t truth, but I am truth itself. There is no truth apart from me. So if you want to know truth, you have to know truth relationally. Now, I know many of you are probably standing, well, we got the Bible. It tells us a little t-truths about Jesus. But it's the Spirit, Jesus' Spirit, that makes those little t-truths personal and real to us. So we operate upon way, truth, and light, that's Jesus, to become aware of. The born-again person uses the way, the truth, life, to interpret or become aware of, perceive that which it will use to regard and interpret things around it. Now, the flesh does this too. Our flesh also interprets things for us. For example, if we're living in the flesh, we may get in a place where we're anxious, for example. Let's just say we're anxious. We don't know why we're anxious. We wish we weren't anxious. We can use lust. We can use any one of these things. We can be in a place where we're feeling something and we don't like what we're feeling. So we start to look for ways to what? Regard or interpret that experience. And if we do that in the flesh, what we do, or we do it apart from way, truth, life, light, we do it apart from God. We use our senses to reach conclusions. And the flesh is always going to be in a place, if it's uncomfortable, it doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Because basically human beings, in fact, most Christians, okay, and to some extent, are hedonistic in that we seek pleasure and avoid pain. And we do that through the senses. See, the Spirit does just the opposite. The Spirit interprets things in light of who God is and the reality He's creating and expanding for us to become aware of. He doesn't look at things in the way the flesh does. Oh, this feels bad. Oh, this feels good. That's where we see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane as a man who knows he's been born to go to the cross. Well, that's not going to be a happy time. That's not going to be a good experience. So as a man, he starts to say to himself, Father, if possible, if it's possible to remove this cup from me so I don't have to go through this experience, could you do so? See, that's the way the flesh, because he had flesh. Jesus had flesh. He had feelings. He had experiences like we do. And he said, if it's possible, is it remove something what the flesh says is bad from me? Could you do that? Well, what does Jesus end up doing? He ends up, the Spirit comes in, the Spirit part of him, that part that has not separated from the Father, says to the Father, but for this reason I was born. See, it isn't a matter of whether it feels good or it feels bad. As the flesh would, the senses would regard or interpret things around us. It's not a matter of that. It's a matter of the Spirit. What does the Spirit say? Because the Spirit interprets things quite differently than the senses do. And that's a thing we're not very taught because the flesh is so powerful. In fact, most Christianity starts out with this change. Most Christian walks start out with this change in perception. You're going along, you're thinking you got it handled, whatever like that. You think you've got it going. And then all of a sudden you realize you don't have it going. Maybe somebody scares you, you're going to go to hell, whatever. But you come to an awareness through your senses that, I'm in a precarious place here. I don't know if I can handle it. And so you turn to something above you, greater than you. You turn to Jesus, okay? And that starts a process where you open up to this world in which you don't rely solely upon your senses to be aware of things or to regard or interpret the things around you. You now have a higher interpreter, a higher spirit by which you will interpret things. And that's the beginning of the Christian walk. That's the beginning. That's the born from above experience. Unfortunately, the enemy knows we're flesh. And so what he does is he creates systems that have influenced your perception through the senses and your way to regard and interpret things right from the beginning. Now, Billy Graham, when I say this, I don't mean to talk bad about Billy Graham, okay? Because through the foolishness of preaching are men saved. But think about the Billy Graham message, okay? In fact, I was involved at the church I was going with a Billy Graham crusade. And the topic of the crusade was, I found it, okay? So again, I'm looking for something that I don't have. I'm trying to find something through my senses that I don't have. And then what's the message is, I found it. All of a sudden, I found something through my senses that's above them, okay? I found Jesus, okay? Well, that was a great message. And so Billy Graham would preach this, and churches would organize around the Crusades, and like our church did. And at the end of every altar call, what does Billy Graham say? He'd say this, okay, something happened to you out there. You know, you realized you needed something above you, greater than you, greater than your senses or your way through the senses to regard or interpret something. So you come down the aisle because that way, the way, truth, life is in Jesus, not in your senses. You're kind of like when I was a kid, I watched this cartoon. It was called Thule the Turtle, I believe is what it was. Well, Thule would go to this wizard who lived in a box, and he let him in, and he wanted to go someplace. He says, you know, I really want to get out of this shell and all of this, and I want to see the world or whatever. So the wizard would send him off someplace. Well, inevitably, like a child, children always want to try to do something separate from their father. They want to become independent. So like Thule the Turtle, they go someplace, they do something, and all of a sudden, what always happened to Thule the Turtle is he ended up getting in real trouble that he couldn't get out of. And so he'd cry out to the wizard, and the wizard would say, drizzle, drazzle, drone, time for this one to come home. And he would bring Thule the Turtle back to where they had been, where he was safe. This is what the Father in heaven does. He's looking at us down here as these kids that are interpreting everything through their senses like a child does, and gets kind of confidence. Oh, I can figure this out. And so he lets us go, and we get into trouble. And then there's an altar call, and we go, marching down the aisle because we're in trouble. We're like Thule the Turtle. We need to come home. So we come home. But at the end of every Billy Graham crusade, this is the part I want to talk about before I get onto this part, would be this. Now that you've given your heart to Jesus, you've made the commitment, the ushers are going to pass out some literature to you. What do you do next since you've made this, answered this call? What do you do next? You go to church the next week. Make sure you attend church the next week. And the churches would get involved in it like our church did, because we would invite people to our church to continue this process. Now, God works through these processes, so don't get don't get crazy like, oh, he's against the church. No, this isn't the case. But inevitably, that church form is influenced to appeal to the senses, like modern music, like lights and smoke and all of this. It's appeal to the senses. And that closes down that openness to the understanding that there's something above my senses. Something that if I operate truly just out of my senses or the flesh, I'll miss God. I'll miss what's really important. I won't understand things from above. I won't be able to regard or interpret things through Jesus, the way, the Spirit. That's the danger of these forms. That's the danger. Now, we're going to learn some quick Hebrew. Okay. Now, if you look at the Hebrew letters, there's 22 of them. And Hebrew is kind of an interesting language because it's both phonetic, like English is phonetic. You look at an E, for example, the vowel E. You know what it is, but it's not a picture of anything. You can't say, oh, that E. You might try to say, well, the E looks like this or whatever, but it's not intended to represent something in particular. Hebrew is a little bit different. It's not only a phonetic language where the letters have sounds to them, but it's a pictorial or a hieroglyphic kind of language too. Now there's the Old Hebrew or the pre-Canaanite Hebrew before Canaan, which would be shortly after the fall, when when the Canaanites take over, one of the sons of grandsons, I think, of Ham. Okay, when they take over, the Canaanites are cursed. Cain, the grandson of Noah, is cursed by Noah. He doesn't curse Ham for what he does, and we won't get into what he does, but he doesn't curse Ham. He curses the Cain, which is the Canaanites, which are going to inhabit the land that the Israelites have to fight and wipe out to take over. They were giants. They were what we would call Nephilim. Okay, so that aside, so you have the pre-Canaanite, which would have been, many believe, the language of men and angels prior to the flood. Okay, so it would have been the language that people would have understood, this pre-Canaanite. Okay, so you have a pre-Canaanite form of the letter, and then you have a post-Canaanite or modern Hebrew letter. Okay, first we're going to talk with the Vav, which is this. It looks like a Y. It's the number 6. Man, 6. He was created on the 6th day. 666. We know what that means. It's the doctrines of men or doctrines of demons, because what the ancient Hebrew, pre-Canaanite Hebrew symbol, this Y, was meant to be a tent peg, a nail, something that connected something to something else. Okay, very important, because what the ancient Hebrews would have said, when God created man, he connected the heavenly realm in Eden to the physical realm through the man. Man was the connector. He was the thing that connected everything together. Without man, the heavens and the earth had no connection until man was created. Then in Eden there was a connection in there. Okay, so that very important. So what we know, and now this little dash like that is modern Hebrew, and that again is the Vav. That's the way the Vav looks. It's lost basically one of the connectors. Like if you see the Y, two things coming together to be one. Okay, well here there's no connector. So man's lost his ability to connect the two realms together. He's just basically comes in through one thing. He comes in through the senses. He doesn't come in through the spirit, because in his state after what we'll call the fall for now, when he does that, he's lost the ability to connect the two realms together. He operates totally upon the flesh or senses, not upon the spirit. Now, the fact that he is man doesn't mean he's not aware of the spiritual realm. It's just that he can't connect it anymore. So that's the spirit. Now we go to the first letter, number 1 in Hebrew, and this is real interesting too, because the post-Canaanite or the modern Hebrew changes the aleph from basically a bull's head to this symbol here. And I'm terrible at Hebrew. My penmanship in the English language isn't that great, but my Hebrew penmanship's terrible. But the aleph, or God, in the ancient Canaanite, pre-Canaanite world would have been seen as a bull's head with horns, okay, which is power, because back then what was one of the more powerful beasts you had? It was a bull, okay? Bull's much stronger, much more powerful than a lion. Doesn't mean a lion can't kill a bull, okay? But the bull is more powerful. So the concept was God was represented as a bowl. And if you look at the images that flow after the flood and after in Babylon, what do we see? The false gods always want to have horns because they're relating this back to, I've got the horns, I've got the power. See, I've risen above God. In fact, in some of the ancient cultures, you would do the bull sacrifice. You would kill the bull because you would kill God. You would replace God. And we can get into that maybe in the next time, but that's the concept of the Aleph, God, power. Okay, number one. The modern Hebrew actually has the vav at an angle, and on either side of it are two what we call yods. Now, a yod is another letter of the Hebrew language, but the new aleph is made up of the vav, or man, but man now is precariously between two yods, or two thoughts, good, evil. So what has become man's God in the post-Canaanite Hebrew? It's become himself. He determines what's good. He determines what's evil. His perception is through his senses, through science, through all of these things. And I'm not saying science doesn't tell us truthful things about how the world operates. I'm not anti-science, but science has its place. It tells us little t truths about the physical world. Doesn't give us the big T truth, but it gives us little t truths, and we observe those by the senses. Now, I'm going to introduce this, and I don't mean to get everybody, but look at what wokeness says, where this idea that through my feelings, I will admit maybe I was born a male or I was born a female. My senses initially told me that I'm, a man or a woman or a boy or a girl. That's the way I was born. But my feelings, spiritual, this is false spirits coming in here through the man who's body and spirit. So it's coming in saying, don't pay attention to your senses. Now, I'm telling you, pay attention to your senses, but let the Spirit of God interpret or regard what you see through your senses. That's what I'm saying. But woke goes this way. It says, don't pay any attention to your senses. Pay attention to what you feel. So if you feel you were born physically a guy or a girl, but you feel the opposite, that's what you go with. And now you have to make the rest of the world accept your personal feeling over the senses. Very dangerous place, because we move from anti-science or anti-little t knowledge to where, again, we move down here to where the man, suspended between two thoughts or two ideas, determines what's right and wrong by how he or she feels. This is where we're at right now. Okay. Now, we may think because Trump got in the White House or whatever, or there's a move back to a religious form, that somehow this is going to straighten this all out. Well, will it? That's a question. Okay. Now, if you don't understand what perceptions, senses versus way, senses, flesh versus Jesus, spirit, if you don't understand that dichotomy and what Jesus has done, you will inevitably, through institutions and through forms that you've been have put in your mind since you were a little kid, to see the world purely based upon senses, forms. Do this, don't do that, do this. Where you determine good and evil, see. And you determine good. You say, well, the Ten Commandments. That's still part of the written word. Jesus looked at Jesus, and the Hebrews would have known no man can be saved by his knowledge through the senses. That the law is there to show you what? You're not God. You can't hold this whole thing together. Someday you walk down the alleyway, you say, I can't hold this together anymore. Save me. Save me, God. Or like Tuli the turtle would say, save me, wizard. But that happens, and you start to see things a little bit different. You start to regard or interpret things a little bit different. But along comes the religious form, and it closes it down, and it says, no, that was good, you made the thing, but now you need the church. You need what we're going to tell you. We're going to be responsible for telling you the truth. And if you don't go along with us, well, you're not saved, you're lost, you're whatever. Okay. That is meant to keep you captive in the senses, the flesh, trying to find the right little t truth rather than the big T truth, Jesus. So you might end up knowing more about Jesus, more about the Bible than anybody else that you know, but you still don't know Jesus relationally. You only know something about him. As my friend told me a long, long time ago when I was dating my wife, Pam, he says, what if there was a book that told you everything about Pam, but you never met her? And you read that book, you memorized it, you knew everything about Pam, all the little T truths, what her favorite color was, all of that. You could recite it. If Pam was sitting there and saying, no, I really don't know about this, well, you could quote the book. You could say, well, this is what you feel about this. Thus saith the word, okay? Thus saith the book about you. But does that mean you know or are in relationship with Pam? No. So this is what we're talking about, because if you're going into the world that's coming upon us with this system or this propositional knowledge of who God that you're going to use to interpret the things around you, you're going to have a rough time for it. So what the next few sessions are is to try to prepare us for what's coming by looking at things, our perceptions, in light of who we are, body, spirit, the way versus the flesh, spirit versus flesh. That's what we're going to do. Now, I'm going to end with this. I'm writing a book right now that's it's novel. It's almost done. The novel is called Sanctuary, and it's about a guy who ends up basically going crazy in the sense that he can't sleep. Every time he starts to sleep, he has these horrible dreams, nightmares. The only place he can sleep is in a church sanctuary. So he doesn't even remember anything about his past other than he has these nightmares. He doesn't even remember who he is. But he knows if he doesn't get sanctuary, get to a safe place, sanctuary is a place of protection or a safe place. If he doesn't get to there, he'll go crazy. He'll just die. So what he doesn't know is he goes to this town where there's two other people in the town who have also sought sanctuary in the same church. One is a priest who's an alcoholic womanizer. The other is a former prostitute. Okay. And together in the book, they end up having their eyes open, not only to who they are, but the war going on around them that they have to overcome. And they can't overcome it by themselves. They have to overcome it together. That's the rough shot of the book. So it's about people like maybe you, who are in one place where you are uncomfortable, and you're looking for sanctuary, and you're trying to run from certain things. It can be depression. It can be your past lives. It can past life in the sense you were a druggie, whatever. But you're trying to find out who you are, and so it's a book about these three people. Actually, there's more of them that go through this process to find out who they are, who they truly are, not who they've been told to be that they were, but who God created them to be. So that's the book Sanctuary. Now, I will warn you, when it comes out, it's an adult novel. This this book has prostitute in it. That should give you some inkling of it. Okay, womanizer, drinker, a man who has nightmares, basically based upon wars. Okay, where horrible things are done. So that's the book. That's going to be coming out pretty soon. And I'll let you know when that comes out. I'm writing another book, and the title of that book is The Problem of Sin. And it's from a very different perspective. It's not going to be a long book, but it's kind of like how God actually looks at sin. Not how the systems have told us to look at sin, but how God sees sin. He sees it quite a bit different, I can guarantee you, than what we've been taught. Okay, those two books will be coming out, and hopefully in the next couple of broadcasts, I'll have some links where maybe you could read an advanced copy of it. But that's what I'm working on. Okay, until then, takeaways, perceptions. Start, when you walk now, start saying, okay, see, you see something through your senses, you feel something, whatever. You immediately use the way that's been trained in you, the way that leads to a broad place, not a narrow place, to regard and interpret those things. And so a lot of times you make judgments based upon this very limited knowledge. What we're talking about is the flesh contracts us. It basically, as Paul says, it becomes this dead body that we carry around. Okay, I want to do this, but I don't do that. I don't want to do this, but I do that. Okay, anyways, who will rescue me? The way, Jesus. That's what we're going to be talking about. So until the next time we meet, shalom, and you all have a blessed day, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.